The most important thing in understanding our relationship to risk is actually shifting our mindset from being an accumulator of wealth and becoming a defender of wealth. When I think about understanding risk, I actually like to think about the story arc of founding a company. So when we found a company, we have to wear all the hats, our backs are against the wall, we've got nothing to lose. But as we scale, we have to start thinking about risk in a different way as far as becoming a better CEO. So as we grow our company to 6, 7, 8 figures and beyond, we actually have to shift our mindset and start ruthlessly outsourcing tasks and delegation and becoming more of a leader rather than a jack of all trades. Well, the same thing is true when we think about wealth. When we're starting our journey at the beginning of our earning days, we're an accumulator of wealth, meaning we're trying to make as much money as possible. But eventually, as we scale the ladder of success, we actually need to shift that mindset and become a defender of wealth. When I say defender of wealth, what am I defending against? Well, risk. Risk is the enemy when I'm talking about wealth. So what types of risks do we see? Well, there are some very common types of risks that I think everyone knows. The first one is market risk. If I'm putting all of my money in the S&P 500 and there's a big stock market meltdown, I could lose 20, 30, 40% of my wealth overnight. So that's market risk. Concentration risk is when I have all of my eggs in one basket. So if I have 99% of my wealth in my primary business and something happens where I either can't work or the market shifts or we lose a key employee, that's concentration risk. Correlation risk means that I have two asset classes that perform similarly. So say I have an e-commerce company and all of the money that I'm taking out of my e-commerce company, I'm putting into Shopify stock. And now Shopify crashes, okay? Both of those are correlated, and so they're going to go up together and down together. Another one, when we think about operating our company, is operational risk, meaning is there some mechanical thing that could happen that would cease us to be able to earn? Okay, so that could be an injury or some sort of disability to the owner. It could be, again, if your business is really reliant on Google or some algorithm and those companies change the algorithm. Amazon is famous for doing this. That poses a real operational risk to your company. The next type of risk that we like to think about is long-tail risk. So this is more of a black swan event. So when I think of long-tail risk, the first thing I think about is the pandemic. All of a sudden, we went from business as normal to a completely different world in what seemed like overnight. Okay? But the biggest type of risk that we actually don't think about that often is non-traditional risk. So how am I spending my time, my health, and my happiness? And that's something that we don't often consider when we're looking at new investments or starting a new venture or buying a new company is, how is this going to affect me personally? So how do we defend against those risks? Number one is diversification. When we think about portfolio theory and spreading our wealth around different asset classes, we can simultaneously defend against concentration risk and correlation risk by having a few different buckets. And like I've talked about before, when I think about buckets, we might only have 2 or 3 strategies, but we just want to make sure those aren't correlated. Our primary business should be our only means of outperforming the market because it has the most risk, but also the highest reward. So how many investments can you think of where you might make 100% year-over-year returns? For most people, the only place they can access those kind of returns is in their primary business. And that's where we should be concentrating most of our risk. Okay, so when I'm taking money out of my primary business, all of my other investments should actually be hedges against my primary business risk. The money that I'm pulling out and that I'm investing should actually be a safety net should something happen in the case of my primary business, okay? Another thing that happens to entrepreneurs is they actually get addicted to the dopamine cycle and addicted to taking risks. So I've been an angel investor for over a decade, and at the beginning of my career, what I didn't understand is every time I invested in a project and I got a home run return, I now had to risk more and make more in order to get the same level of feeling from my internal hormones, okay, like dopamine. So every time that we knock it out of the park, our brain releases neurochemicals that actually condition us to that response. And if we're not paying attention, all of a sudden we can get addicted to that cycle and we can lose a whole lot of money really quickly. So we got to be very conscious of breaking that dopamine cycle and saying, hey, do I actually need to risk this money in order to get the outcome that I desire? Okay. A question I love to ask myself when I'm thinking about risky investments outside of my primary business is, why do I need my investments to outperform the market? If my business is growing year over year, that should be the all of the high risk bucket that I need. Again, everything else is just giving me that safety net, okay? Another place that we can determine the risk of our portfolio is understanding liquidity. So there are 3 types of liquidity buckets. The first one is liquid. Liquid means that you can access those funds in 24 hours. So that could be cash, that could be crypto, those could be index funds or stocks. Anything that I can pull out in 24 hours is liquid. Semi-liquid is anything that I can access from, say, 30 to 90 days. So a home or a rental property falls in this semi-liquid bucket. Now, some people's businesses might fall into this bucket, but some businesses are harder to sell. Anytime we're investing in privately held companies that we don't control, that's going to fall in the illiquid bucket. And the problem with illiquid investments is they can look great on paper, but if something happens to your primary business, there's no chance you can access that in any kind of time frame or return that's acceptable. So when we think about risk, illiquidity, even if the investment is outperforming on paper, could actually be a huge risk to your portfolio. And if most of my wealth, say 90% of my wealth, is tied up in my primary business, liquidity is king, because once again, it's providing me that safety net that I'm not getting from my primary business. So how do I create balance? The first thing is to do a liquidity test. I look at everything that I've invested in, including my primary business, and I determine what percentage of my portfolio is liquid, again, accessible in 24 hours, what percentage is semi-liquid, which is that 30 to 90 day mark, and then if I can't access it for 5 to 7 years, that falls in the illiquid investment range. And if I'm stacked up on illiquid investments, the number one thing I need to do is start rebalancing my portfolio to liquidity, okay? I like to think about how much should I have liquid should be 12 months of living expenses and 6 months of business operating expenses. And that's just a minimum. There's plenty of great cases to be made to why to have a significant amount more than that in liquidity. And then finally, when you're doing this analysis, look at non-traditional and long-tail risk factors. When you're looking at investing in illiquid investments like startups, think about how this is going to affect me. What is the time that I need to require to do due diligence? Is this a company that I'm acquiring for myself and then I might have to run if it doesn't perform well? And then what long-tail risk factors there might be? What happens to me and my family in the case of a disability or an accident? What happens if there is a global pandemic, for instance? And how can I protect against that? I hope this has helped you understand your own relationship to risk. To look more closely at your personal investment portfolio, reach out to a wealth architect here at Wealth Factory. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe and don't miss out on a single Wealth Factory tip, like this next one with proven ways to build your wealth.